Alrighty, so this is Make with Sam, and this is the class Tinkercad. So it's 3D design with Tinkercad, and we're gonna go through a number of different things today. One of them being who I am, another one being kind of what are primitive shapes, how to understand 3D modeling in a basic way. There are some other styles of 3D modeling that we're not gonna necessarily cover, but definitely this is one of the, like I said before, most fundamental styles of 3D modeling. And then we'll go over some basics of how to use the program. So pretty quickly we'll be in the program. If you do want to follow along, there might be a point where you have to sign into Tinkercad. So you could actually kind of preemptively start getting over there and going to www.tinkercad.com and signing in. And then by the time we get to the demos, you'll actually be ready to rock, because it does take about a few minutes to get signed in with the email and all that stuff. And then the last and I guess kind of meat of this is going to be how to create a keychain or a like a nameplate, like a desk placard or something like that. Something where you can customize it, put your name on it or put your nickname or whatever you want to put on it, some symbols, and just how to do something basic like that. And then a little Q&A and then resources, some stuff like that here at the end. Showing my portfolio, showing a few things that I've done. I'll probably even in between show some things that I've done as physical examples, and even in the computer when we get to the demo part of it. So who is Sam? It's me, y'all. So basically I am a artist, a maker, an entrepreneur, an instructor. I do a lot of different things. I graduated in 2012 with my bachelor's degree in multimedia, or ultimately in fine arts. So I know a lot about the computer art and then also the physical traditional art too. So I do a little bit of everything. Worked at Microsoft for a while, so I adopted some teaching skills there, and also my first 3D printer. So that's kind of relevant to this particular class for sure. And then I also have over 6 years of experience, probably leaning towards 7 now, just because as the years roll on, just gaining more and more experience on different things that I've done. And a lot of design skill in 2D and 3D. So basically I know a lot of stuff, at least particularly about the stuff I'm talking about here. So let's get to the basics. All right, primitive modeling. So what is it? Basically, it's using these geometric shapes: the cube, the sphere, the cylinder, the cone, the torus, which is the donut shape, wedges, which is like or a prism, which would be F, technically is a prism, and so is C. They're both prisms. And then the pyramid, which kind of has some other special shapes that are compounded beyond these. But these would be the main ones that in Tinkercad, we're going to start off with using these to make more stuff. So you're going to combine different shapes together, subtract shapes from each other. Different things like that are going to allow you to make what you can imagine, simply put. So basically, let's get to it. So Tinkercad itself, if you haven't heard of it, it is a Autodesk program. Autodesk is a company that makes a lot of different 3D software, a lot of different 3D programs, packages that allow you to create different stuff. Engineers use them, hobbyists use them. A lot of different people use not only Tinkercad, but they use other Autodesk programs. So eventually I'll probably teach another program here soon. One of them is called Mesh Mixer, and that particular program is the Autodesk program too. It's also free. Tinkercad is online, but it is free. And then the other one you would download onto your desktop computer, and then from there you actually could use it offline. But this program is an online app, so ultimately you would go to the website. And that's where we're at. So if you want to follow along, like I said, you're going to go and open up your browser. I would say Chrome. It seems to be more stable with Tinkercad. And then www.tinkercad.com. It's going to have a sign in, and after you get there, you'll get to a page like this, but without all of these designs. So yours will just say my recent designs, and it'll say create a design, but not all of this extra stuff. So just before we get started, just to kind of show you guys that I've put some work in on this program. I've put in, I want to say, over 20 pages of like different things, different stuff, things that actually I wish I had brought over here to the table with me so I could grab, like this lion ring, or I don't know, different things. I'm going to turn my video off here so we can see the full page, but this is the lion ring I was talking about. I think it was covered up by the video. Yeah, a lot of different stuff, down to, I do gardening, so I've made like sprouting lids for jars, sprouted a bunch of different things inside of jars and then planted them, made board game parts and pieces, ornaments for Christmas, a lot of stuff. I mean, just a ton. And this is like rolling back from the past years or so that I've made things in between different classes I've taught, but also just different things I made for my own personal sake. I've made stamps. There's like this is a lot of stuff I use the 3D design for is for 3D printing, but you could use it for video game design. You could use it just to visualize something or visualize an idea. There's a lot of reasons why I think you design things. Though this program is not limited to 3D design, it can design things for electronics, or you can code and do different things like that. But my primary use for this is definitely real world use or physical use in most cases from a 3D printer, which I have a few of. So let's get started. Let's talk about how we do stuff in the program. So first thing you're gonna always do, you'll always be on 3D designs over here to the left, just below where your profile name is. And then you're gonna click on create new designs, that big blue button, can't miss it unless your eyes are closed. And then once your interface is loaded, your viewport, as we're looking through here, we're looking through a viewport, which you would call it in most 3D programs. And they give you a grid. Call it a work plane. And this is where most of your things that you're gonna make are gonna exist. They're gonna end up on the grid here. Sometimes it might get distracted from each other, added, but ultimately everything's gonna live here until you export it out to use somewhere else. First thing I always like to do, maybe at the beginning, maybe at the end, but you can change the name up here. This time around, we're just making it's like a demo. So maybe I'll call it demo, but just knowing that you can just click on the name, push enter, it'll change the name. So when you export it out, the name will already be there, or always remember at the end to name it. If let's say you didn't know what you were making at first. And in this case, there was no particular objective. It's more of just showing how things work. So first thing we're going to talk about are the shapes. Then we'll go around the interface. We'll talk about how you combine things, how you mirror, how you do some other different like transformational things. But then we'll talk about the navigation as well. And actually, first off, let's talk about navigation instead of shapes. So just in 3D space, you can move in, you can move up and down, side to side, and you can also rotate around things. So your mouse is going to be your best friend. If you're using a laptop, I'd probably recommend plugging in a mouse of some form, whether it's wireless or corded, and make sure that you can use that, because that is going to give you the most control. But your left click on the mouse is your selection. So if I wanted to grab a shape, I would left click on it, then left click again to drop it onto the work plane. I could also left click and drag a shape and it'll drop it too. So there's two different ways to do that. Your zoom, in this case, is your middle mouse wheel. So you're gonna roll that forward almost like you're scrolling through, let's say, a page on the internet, but this time it's actually gonna move you forward and back. If you wanna go around the object, that's your right click, hold, and drag. So I'm dragging left to right, but I'm holding the mouse down at the very moment. I'm holding my right click button down and I'm dragging. So it's giving me the ability to move around the object so I can see, so I can understand a little bit better than just one perspective on the object. So that is going to be very important, just those couple things that I just talked about, just rotating and zooming so I can move into the corner if I needed to. Or there's one more, which is panning. So these are all kind of camera moves that we're doing. If you're familiar with any type of cinematography in real life with a real camera, these are different types of moves that you would do. The last one, panning, is literally moving the camera or your view left to right, and I'm holding the middle mouse button down. Instead of rolling the wheel, I'm pushing it down like a button. So move left, move right is literally sliding left and sliding right. So it's actually kind of opposite. It's actually when you move right, it's left. When you move left, it's right. And then when you move the mouse down, it actually moves it upward or moving down. So it's opposite. But you'll get used to that. The main thing is just knowing that you can and getting some practice in there with navigation. So all of your other navigational tools on the interface are actually right over here. So if you ever needed to just get to the top of your view or top of your work plane, you can click on top. And you can even rotate the view 90 degrees with these arrows, or perspective turns, meaning kind of like looking at it from an angle, with the corners of the box up here. So this little navigation box is pretty useful. You can even click on it, hold it, and drag it, and it'll go crazy if you're moving too fast, but it will allow you to kind of freely move around and rotate around the center point of your world. So playing around with that is awesome, but then you also have a home button. It resumes the original position of when you started. Or fit on, like, what does it say? Fit view or focus is basically what I would like to call this one. Just because if you click on F, it focuses or zooms in on that object exclusively. If you have more than one object selected, let's say I select with the left click mouse and I drag, select everything, then I push focus or push F, it zooms in as far as it can on those objects. So it is a very useful way to navigate. You can zoom in on your particular project in a overall way or individual way. So it's local or overall. But then your zoom in and out, that's the same thing as your middle mouse wheel. So I think it's a less convenient to come all the way over here to zoom in and out. I think it'd be easier if you were just to use the middle mouse wheel. And then the last tool on this is switch to flat view. This is basically the true orthographic views that you would see if you were, I guess, doing this in a true CAD program. When we're not in that view, it's more showing us a perspective view all the way around. Even if we were in a front-on view, it would still actually be representing a different type of thing. Like it wouldn't represent as flat as it should be. So if I click on this and switch it, now it looks quite different. It looks very flat in 2D versus this. So what we're going to do here is now talk about how we combine things, how we subtract objects, how we add them together, the different shapes and multitude of different shapes that we have. Some of them we saw on the primitive page, kind of what is a primitive here. But we have a whole lot more of those than just that. So we have some special ones where you can draw freehand. We have text that you can add in your own words or your own symbols or different things like that, mainly text or names or whatever. You can do a lot with it though. But then also we have some other different shapes here too. So it depends on what you're after, what we're trying to make. And then if you drop down this too, oh, give me one sec. Hey, Grandpa, could you close the sliding door for me really quick? Yeah, close the door so we don't hear extra sound. My grandpa's sitting in with this too, so he's the audience. He's the second audience member if nobody else shows up. But basically, there's a lot of different shapes here that we can deal with, from just individual letters to connectors for different things. If you wanted to make your own articulating shape, their own toy or something like that. To shape generators that actually can be adjusted and things like that. So we'll get to a lot of these things, but let's just talk about the basics here for the shapes themselves. So when you grab a shape, and I'll delete these, and we'll just start back from the beginning, the basic shapes. Just a left click again. And now if I click on my object, I have this menu up here that pops up. Drop it down, and it has some different things you can adjust. So the generated shapes could actually do some of this too, but the basic shapes actually do have some form of adjusting it. So this radius is going to give this object some curved, rounded, or beveled corners. The steps is going to be talking about, if I zoom in on this object and I look at kind of this edge right here, the steps is the smoothness or how many polygons it's using to make up this shape. So if I go down to 1, it's very planar. You can see the edges now. Versus if I go to step 2, it doesn't show the edges as clear, but you can see that there's more faces there. So that may be important, that may not be. It depends on what you're doing. Just know that you can adjust this stuff to give yourself more than just a 6-sided cube or box. Cylinder has its own functions too. There are different attributes that can be adjusted. So bevel is going to be similar, and then segments this time is the edge count, like how many divisions it's doing on the edge. Hole, solid. Solid actually allows you to change the color. Hole actually allows you to turn it into a subtracting tool. So if we see these two up here in the selection area on the shapes, we have a hole box, and then we have a cylinder that's also a hole. But you can turn any shape into a hole by simply going from solid to hole. So any of these shapes in all the different panels that we have here, all these different menus of different shapes, anything could be turned into a hole. So you could technically make like a mold out of anything, which is pretty cool, versus mold making in the real world is actually kind of hard to do and get that negative shape sometimes. Versus in the computer, you can be pretty easy to do, especially in this program. So let's combine these shapes together. Let's just do something abstract here. So let's see what it looks like if I were to combine the sphere with this cube. And I'm just going to do it loosely first, and then we'll start to talk about these transform tools up here and how they start to work. But I'll just simply left click and drag and move my shape into this other shape. If I want to move it up and down, I need to use this arrow to do that. If I want to squash the shape, like squish it like vertically, like a ball, it's the top square or the white box at the top. So when I click on a shape, you have a bunch of different gizmos or manipulators or whatever you want to call them, ultimately buttons. They're going to give you the ability to do different things. The arrow is the up and down. This is going to be a vertical height adjustment. So if I click on it, it gives me a number, and this number is how tall it is in millimeters. Right now we're measuring in millimeters. So just to take a side note, this is a good point, I would say, to think about having a ruler with you when you design. It's going to help, I guess, give you more control over how big your scale actually is. If you're 3D printing it, you're definitely gonna need to know how big it is if it's something that needs exact size. Just in the beginning, scale might not be that important for you, but towards your intermediate use of 3D programs, I think it will be. So just thinking about scale of things is important. Having rulers that measure in inches and in millimeters is good. Down here at the bottom, if we click on Edit Grid, this gives me the ability to switch from millimeters to inches, bricks, whatever that is, some Lego measurements or something. But in this case, the real world measurements that we know about, metric, millimeters, or imperial inches. So it also tells you kind of, if we switch 2 inches, how big of a work plane we're really dealing with, about 8 inches by 8 inches, a little bit under that. So that's the work size of some 3D printers. My 3D printer is about that size. So I'm designing something in the size parameters of what my machine can handle. So I just canceled it. So it actually went back to millimeters. It stayed in millimeters. But if I did want to ever switch that, I would have pushed OK. All right. So let's jump back to what we were doing here. Sorry, I'm bouncing around a bit, but when a thing comes up, I like to hit on it just a little bit before I forget the idea. So this particular box sphere combo, if we were to go select both and then go up here to the top, we have group. Next to group, which is grayed out, would be ungroup. And then also we have align and mirror. So we're going to talk about those next. And when you use them, maybe why you use them. So group is the first one. It's the main thing. It's how you combine shapes together to create new shapes. So if you push group, it cuts out the sphere, cuts out the negative portion from the positive portion. So always think about it like that. If solid is positive, the whole is negative. Positive, negative come together, it's subtraction. If you do two positives, it's a addition. So how that would look, simply. So this time I'll maybe rotate this 90 degrees. If I move the rotation tool, depending on which one you grab, you'll see the little gizmo or that circular like compass deal. You'll see that show up. And if you're moving in the inside, it's gonna snap in the inside there. It's gonna snap against those inner ticks. If you move on the outside, it's gonna freely rotate amongst all 360 degrees. So if you ever messed up and you didn't want to undo all that movement or all the things you've done, combines, undos is going to be your friend. It's up here at the top. It's also Control Z. So let's move this something like that. Sure. And let's also use align now. So we have to select both objects, and then align is going to be this one where there's a line and two shapes next to it. So when I click on align, it gives me the ability to use these middle nodes, middle dots, to center. Or if I didn't want to center, I could use the other dots. But now that I have it centered, I'll show that one more time. Select both things, align. I clicked on the center dots to center the object amongst the other one. And then now I can combine the two objects together and create a, it actually kind of looks like a rough shape for like almost like a Monopoly piece for like a special looking house or like some type of building, like top of the roof to a building. And that's actually kind of how easy it is to think about how to combine things together, is that you can see the different shapes, see that there's a roof shape here, rounded shape here, kind of a, it's almost like a cathedral or like a combination of different architecture or something like that from the past. Something you would see in Europe or something like that, especially where these intersections are working. So we've got a add and subtract, so it's really just a subtraction. And then we have an addition. And then you could also even add holes together as well, which is the same thing as adding, I guess, in the positive world. So if I had two holes, you could group these together to make like a compound hole. And then this hole could subtract from a positive shape this time. So I'm using the black points to move in one direction. I can use the white points to move in two directions when it comes to the length and the width, not the height. The height is manipulated by this point up here, but the length and the width of the objects, the white points are manipulating both. If you loosely move, if you hold shift and drag, it will actually lock in the proportions. So this is actually some good things to know about, that shift while doing things will snap or lock things in in a particular way, especially when it comes to locking proportions in while you scale up an object. You don't want it to get all wonky and out of shape. You want to keep things moving evenly across the directions as they go bigger. So now that we've made a box big enough to hold this hole, we can select both again and group it. And then now we have this cutout in here that it has that shape of the two objects that were combined cut out of it. Like we could have done this individually and it would have worked maybe the same way, but just knowing that you can combine the holes, you can combine solids, you can combine the hole and the solid. So the three ways that anything can work in this program. Yeah, so that's kind of the beginning, I guess, of like how you do most things in this program. At this point, do we have any questions? If not, I'll keep going. So next, let's try to make something. So like I said, I was going to make either a keychain or a kind of nameplate. So I guess the easiest thing, and I'm going to show a couple examples really quick maybe before we do that. So the necklace I'm wearing, these beads, which are super simple to make, are literally just the 3D printed beads. And they're just spheres with a cylinder cut through them to make the hole. Easy. I mean, anybody can make this once you figure out the little basics that I just talked about. So if we were even just to show an example of how the bead was made really quickly, this is it. Stretched them out a little bit. I took a sphere, stretched it out, took a cylinder, made it tall enough to cut through the bead, but then it's obviously a little bit too big as a cylinder, so I can hold shift, use that, hold shift and then drag, and that's what scales the object down. You could even do it from the top too. You can hold shift and scale from the top, but it's going to scale inward versus this other one was actually scaling towards like the corner. So maybe that matters, maybe that doesn't for how you're designing, but you can also change these numbers. So I can go down and say 10 instead. And now it's not tall enough, but I'll just size it back up, turn it to a hole, select both, and then I can align. And then now once I've aligned them, I can group them. There it is. That's basically what I'm wearing right now, like especially when it comes to this one. The other one, I just didn't stretch it. I just kept it normal. And then what you're seeing is paint and post-processing on the beads. So that's why they maybe don't look 3D printed, but that's what we're seeing there. And I had made a whole group of these things. I actually have a file that I can open back up, and I actually have beads with lines that are squirrels that are cut out of the beads and all kinds of different like cosmetic things that have been added to them, more than just plain surface. So definitely that's like a super simple thing. If you like jewelry making or something like that, this will be kind of your best friend to kind of make cool things. Then you just have to find a person who can 3D print or even buy your own 3D printer. Another thing that's cool, and I'll even probably show the file here, is a spaceship, which kind of dusty, but basically it's kind of like a thing that sits on my shelf. But it's like a spaceship, and I even made like a little dock for it, and I even had a number for it. It's called SRD301 or something, some StarCraft related type of situation. But it's modeled from spheres. It's modeled from actually a few different shapes that are from the other shapes in Tinkercad here. So lots of cool things. Here's my last level of inspiration. These are the coolest things for Halloween. So they have these, hopefully we can see that, I guess, in the camera. It has those skull eyes, which that's obviously added in, but this is 3D printed too. But I found the goggle design and I added the skulls all around. And I added the skulls up in this part here and gave it kind of more of a Halloween look. At first they were just plain kind of like circular steampunk looking goggles or whatever, but I made them more like Halloween steampunk goggles. All that stuff happening here in Tinkercad. So just because we have time here. This one's going a little bit faster paced because it's more simple of a program. Some of the programs I teach, they're a little bit more complex, have a little bit more to them. This is a beginner program, so it's not as hard for entry, but there is still a lot you can do in it. So just as an example, I'm going to see if I can find those goggles really quick through the list here. And if we can find it, then I'll open up the file so you can see kind of how complex it can get. Yeah, a lot of good stuff in here. Was making like all kinds of rings. Yeah, the jewelry thing was fun for me. Definitely. Like some stained glass types of situations here. Doing all kind of stuff. So much, it's trying to still load it. If I can't find it, that's okay. I'll just jump right back into the keychain name tag dilly, but it should be popping up here. I might even have went too far. I think I went too far. Ah, here we go. Here's the spaceship. This is where the spaceship is. This is a good one. I'll show this quick and then we'll go back into the last demo here and then wrap it up. So yeah, actually before it like finishes kind of putting everything back together, we can see how it looks, all of these holes that are subtracting and doing all these different things. And that was for the stand mainly, cutting the stand down and making it look like that. And then this as well had a bunch of different pieces. And I even tried to separate them out so we can kind of see what they looked like as well at one point. But the pieces look pretty simple. It looked pretty basic, but getting to those pieces shapes sometimes is kind of tricky. Like if I had made this from scratch, this particular shape from scratch, which I didn't, I used a, what do you want to call it? Let me turn my video off so we can see the panel. It basically was one of these shape generators and I found it. It's called the revolved. Let's see what it's called. I can't even see the whole thing. Ah, the way they've cut this off, it's hard to see it because it was too long of a name in their interface. But there was a particular shape in these shape generators that allowed me to do certain things that some of the basic shapes just I could not do. I couldn't, or I didn't want to spend too much time trying to combine a bunch of shapes just to make one simple shape. Or like down here on the actual bottom of this, I used the text generator, typed in some random letters really quick, and then subtracted them, turning the text into a whole. So just giving you guys kind of a priming of where things can go down and how things are getting combined, and then we're gonna do one. We're gonna do maybe even two things in this time we have left because it can be quick. If you already know what you're going for, it can definitely be very quick. But a lot of this stuff is basic, super basic. You can make a lot of cool stuff just from it. There's a few other spaceship designs that I had made for another Tinkercad class that I had taught in the past before it was just these online classes. And I did a few different ones, and I only really printed this one. I thought it looked the coolest out of the other few that could have been made. But yeah, spaceship, shuttle thingy. I thought it was cool. All right, let's create a new design. And this time around, let's call it name tag. And where I like to start usually with name tags is like the background plate itself, the plate where your name's gonna go. So usually there's always a safe bet, starting with a box, turning it into a rectangular type shape. So using those black points to drag it along in one direction. If you're using measurements and you know how long you want this thing to be, I'd probably type it in. I think I have a ruler right here that can tell me how long I want this to be. So I think I'm gonna make mine probably around, I'm gonna use millimeters, probably around 60 millimeters long. So I can type in that number, 60. And then I can make it maybe no more than 5 millimeters thick, maybe even less than that, 4. So I can change that 20 to 4. So that very top white point, click on that, change it to 4. And then now we have something that's closer to the thickness we want, the size we want. And then now I can actually make it have some rounded edges. There's a couple ways to do it. One, I could use that radius, which gives it a certain type of look, more of like an oval type of look. If you go all the way across or closer to the end, that's maybe not the look I was after. I was looking more for like a rounded type of circular look on the edge. So that's where this one's going to be more complex to make, but it will maybe look the way that I wanted it to. So first thing, I'm going to bring a cylinder out. I'm going to change it to 4 on the height like we did before. And then now I'm just going to drag it in loosely. If I can position it right up the way it's supposed to, that's good. That looks good to me from there. If I want one side to be like that, I could leave it. Maybe I want 2 styles to this keychain. So I can duplicate this by selecting both and clicking duplicate right up here at the top, which I actually already did with Control Z. Or maybe I didn't. Oh, I did. So now that we have 2, I can actually do different things to one versus another. So let's, and don't forget about your other things that you can do up here. So duplicate to one of them, delete either here or on your keyboard, undo, redo if there's something forward and you went back, and then paste and copy. So those are all Control C, Control V, Control Z if you're a shortcut type person. If not, you can always know they're at the top here. So let's combine these 2. So now we have this style of maybe like a key fob type of look, or almost USB. That's what it kind of looks like. But then this one, I'm going to duplicate. So Control D, and then move this down to the other side. And then if I need to nudge anything ever, I can use my arrows on my keyboard. That'll actually allow me to move with the snapping that's on at the bottom. So snap grid down here at the bottom allows me to move 1 millimeter every time I use my arrow key, up, down, left, or right. It will move the object 1 millimeter over. If I needed to move in different sizing, different steps, I can go through this list and choose the appropriate one. Whatever brick means, once again. But I would say, I'm sure, like I said, it's a Lego related thing. If you look up here at the top, they've got Minecraft blocks, and then they also have bricks. So things that are related to other worlds. But in this case, off is arbitrary movement. Everything else is going to move it in a particular way. But 1 is a good safe bet because most things are going to be solid numbers and things like that, so you can move them easily. So there it is. We have 2 different background plates that we could start with. Last thing I might do before I put the name on there is put the hole in where my keychain or my key ring would hold this to it. So a perfectly circle could be fine if I wanted that, but I like it more squished in so I can have more real estate over here for my name, especially on this style of it since it's a little bit more limited. And then I could duplicate this and move it down here as well. And if I'm fancy, I don't have to use a hole. I could use a different shape if I was fancy. And this time I'm gonna be. So let's do this and make a star cutout instead of the traditional boring circle. No, circles aren't boring. They're infinite. They're not boring. That's the cool thing about them. You can't count them. So you can't count the sides at least. All right, so now we can group these up. Awesome. Now we have the nameplate started. Now we just need to put the name on. So we're gonna stay on basic shapes, probably scroll back up towards the top if you're far down, and we can find text here. And it's gonna be way bigger than we want in the beginning. That's okay. Let's change the name, or change the text to, well, a name. Sometimes I like to change the color just so I can visually see what's going on. Red on red is not always the easiest thing to see. Or the same color on the same color. Awesome. And then now we get to decide how tall we want it to stick out of. So a 4 is our thickness. Maybe sticking out 2 millimeters above or 2.5. So that would be 6 or 6.5. Awesome. It could even be a little lower than that. 6 might even work better. Sure. Awesome. Maybe on this one, it says something different. Like, I have no clue what it could say. Star, because it has a star on it. Anything you need. It could be numbers. It could be anything. I even made a little fob for, I guess it was like almost like a thing to help me remember certain numbers. And I just put the numbers on this thing, and I was able to utilize it when I needed to. Awesome. And then now let's change this one too. And let's do this one opposite. Instead of letters that are sticking outward, let's turn the star into a hole. So now we're doing just 2 versions, 2 different ways. It's almost like cooking food, you know, like a surf and turf or something. Awesome. So now we've got the opposite to this. If we ever need to see how deep our letters are cutting in, there's an easy trick. It's switching the main thing to a hole and then switching the other thing to a solid. And then you kind of can see it a bit better. Like we're cutting about halfway through here. If we wanted to cut a little less deep, we can move our shape up. And then we're going to just flip these things back to the original hole solid. Select both and group. And then now we've got the star cut into the surface. So 2 different ways. This time I need to group these 2 up just so they're all one piece. Awesome. Sometimes I like to just switch it to colors that maybe it's going to be the colors that I'm going to 3D print with. Or maybe they're just colors that allow me to see better. Some of the colors are harder to see the object. Cool. So there it is. Maybe it's not now name tag, but name tags. Awesome. So there's one version of a demo. Let me do one more. I'm gonna do a name, like something you would put on your desk, like a, you know, a desk plate. So let's do that one next. So I'm gonna click on my Tinkercad icon at the top. It's gonna bring me back to my designs. If you're ever questioning how I got there in the first place, it's always clicking on the icon up here, the home button, and then from there, we get back to our designs. I'm gonna create a new design. So all your designs save automatically if you're questioning that too. They save in that list. As long as you name it something that's reasonable, you should be able to recognize it, or you can see the visual and understand it too that way. This time we're going to call this one a nameplate. And we're going to start with something maybe like this roof. And I'll turn it 90 degrees. Make it longer. So using my ruler just as a quick guide, I'm going to make this thing about 160 on its width, which is approximately, if we were doing this in inches, it's a little over 6 inches, about 6.5 inches roughly. So now I'm going to cut this back end off to make this flat, and I'm going to put the name part on here, like on this surface. So I'll use a box, and I'm just imagining how nameplates look. Not that I'm making these things all the time. I make the name tags more than I make this particular demo, but yeah, we're gonna see how it works. And I might do some adjustments here to this shape by making it a little taller, so the name's not as angled. And then I'll cut off a little more in the back here. And this will be kind of a simple one where it's not too complicated on the shape, but it's still representing the idea. Sure. And then now, let's just get that name in there first, and I might do some cosmetic things to the outside to make it look a little cooler, and then we'll wrap this up in the next 3 minutes. So let's do the boss. Capitals on the boss. There are a few different fonts that you can switch through if you didn't notice that before. Drop down the menu. Let's rotate this. It's not going to be 90 degrees, but it is going to be more like in between 90 and 0. So not quite 45 either. Whoops. So what I did there is I think I clicked on the work plane, or I used the work plane tool, and it actually will allow you to build things off of that angle too. So that actually is a good way to make the angle of your letters be exactly what they should be. Let's actually demo that really quick. So if you click on this work plane and you click on the plane that you want, it adds a new plane. And then now you can click on text and put the text on that plane. And now it's perfectly on that angle. So we don't have to struggle to get the right angle for it, basically. It just click and it finds the angle for you, and then you just add whatever shapes you want onto that angle. It's pretty slick. So let's use that, and then let's call it the boss again. Take it. There it goes. I'm not sure why I kept going back to text. I think it, because I was adjusting these parameters here, and I think it just made it weird. Right, so now I'm going to hold shift, scale this down a bit. I'll use the height and push this in so it's a lot closer to the surface. And then now I can embellish it, I guess, with some stars or some different things like that. I think that's kind of how this could work. Yeah, maybe I'll use this style of star primarily. And I just went copied, and now I'm just pasting these now. Whoops. And whatever else you could think to do. I would say this, it doesn't have to be stars. It could be any shape you could imagine or find in the list. There's even these country shapes or like different, interesting, under the featured. Maybe not it's featured, but maybe it's all. Here we go. You could be the boss of one of these places. The boss of, is that Alaska? It says United States, but oh, the states are inside of this. This is New York. I'm tripping. It looked kind of like Alaska, I guess, for 1 second. That's what Alaska looks like, y'all, if you didn't know. So they actually have different generators to pull different shapes up from like a, almost like a pre-programmed list of different things. And each one of these is going to have, it looks like, different things in it. So now you're the boss of Alaska. Awesome. So I think once you're done with these work planes, I'm wondering if you can delete them or hide them, or maybe that's just what it is now. But let's combine all this together, group it. So once it's read like that, it's just thinking and trying to process the information. And I know it's having a hard time trying to process this particular shape because it's kind of complex, but it still did it. And then now we have, yeah, I'm not exactly sure how you switch between the work planes. I'll have to figure that out in the next round of these tutorials. But ultimately, let's say I wanted to export this out. I'm going to click on export at the top here. Download and 3D print is what it says. They even give you a way to 3D print it from popular 3D printers online. So this is actually a pretty cool way that even if you do not own a 3D printer, you can utilize places like this to export out your shape, and then it sends it to these people, and then they give you a quote, and from there you can choose your color, your material, and things like that. If you own a 3D printer, this is where you would download it, and you would download the STL or the OBJ. So STL is the most common. Click on that. If it has the name up here, we call it nameplate. Maybe I should have called it the boss nameplate. And then when I export it, it actually has that name built in. So it's good to name when you're about to export, or make sure the name is accurate to what you think it should be at the end. Alrighty, so that is, I guess, going to conclude my demos and the learning aspect of this class. So I guess lastly, we're just going to start talking about some resources. So I have a few things here that let me pop up on the screen so I can scroll through them a bit with you. So this is my, basically Make with Sam is my new brand, but 3D Build Tower was, and still is technically, like my 3D aspect of what I do. I prototyped for people in the past. I did a lot of teaching and education in the past. And if you ever wanted to check out some of the things that I've done for people, it's here, 3dbuildtower.com, as well as my 2D design and kind of all-encompassing, I guess, design portfolio. My graphic design portfolio is online at behance.net. Hightower. So ultimately you can scroll through stuff like this here and find some pretty cool projects that I've worked on in the past too, some of them being 3D related. Awesome. And then lastly, little Q&A if anybody has any questions. Oh, I see there is a question from Holly. Or not a question, but it looks like she said like how you do it. It just stops showing the second one if you drag a new work plane into an empty space. Let's go back to that really quick and solve that problem. I was curious. Okay, work plane. You just click back on the other one. That's all it was. Work plane, you click on if you want a new work plane on a surface, you click on the surface at that angle. If you want to take that away and you want to go back to the original one, you just click back on the surface where the work plane was. That's it, y'all. We figured it out. Awesome. Anybody else have any questions? That wasn't really a question as much as yes, I had the question. So definitely.